So this morning I was greeted by Puff, who found a way out of the cage in the night and decided to have a bit of a walk around in the shed during the course of the night. So we'll get her into her pen and then we'll get on with the day. Morning, Puff. Well, you could say that these foxglove are past their best, but they've been lovely. So this year we're going to save some seed and grow them from seed next year. And it's a very simple process with these. You literally shake the old seed heads into a bowl. And there we have it, a whole load of seed for next year. There seems to be two colours there, which is interesting, but we'll do some more of that and put those away in a brown envelope, mark them up and sow them next year. There we are, and that'll be more than enough for our needs. So today's video is going to be quite exciting. This is my Charlotte potatoes grown in reused compost. So the compost was basically last year's potato compost mixed with a few other bits and bobs, some mixed compost from other plants and also some bedding from the chicken coop. And that was mixed up and filled into compost bins and left to stand all the way through the autumn and the winter, right up until when I planted the potatoes in early spring. And this is a trial to see if I can use that spent compost over and over again. So this is its first reuse. And I fed it with some bloodfish and bone and a little bit of potato compost feed. So we're going to open this up, reveal the potatoes in there, and I guess the benchmark is the Charlotte potatoes I grew in fresh compost in the polytunnel. They're obviously that much earlier because they had the heat and they were in fresh compost, and it was a really good crop. So it'll be really interesting to see the volume out of these spent compost potato pots versus the new. So I'm going to clear off this old grass which I put on top just to keep the moisture in, and it's interesting because looking at it, the compost is still really quite moist, so that's a very successful method of just trying to keep a bit of moisture into the potato pots. So with no further ado, I'll get the wheelbarrow and we'll clear these tops off and see what's underneath. Right, here we go. So we'll get this grass off to start with. And the remainder of the foliage. And then we'll start digging. 2. Well, it's going reasonably well. I'd say my first impression is that it's not quite as many as in the fresh compost, but the growing conditions have been different as well. Obviously these aren't in the warmth of the polytunnel to start, but there's certainly a good handful in here. That's the old seed potato. Right, so just check through, make sure that there's none lurking in here. If you see these tiny ones, it's best to get them out at this stage because they only get a shoot on them and then they start growing and using the goodness of the compost. So I think that's it, and my immediate reaction is I probably need to add a little bit more feed. I wasn't overly generous with the feed that I put in here, and of course next year it's going to be its 3rd use, so I just need to bear that in mind. But we'll try this other pot and see if it's any different. So that's pot number 1. What is nice is that these potatoes have got no marks on them whatsoever. Given that that's the 2nd use of this compost, you'd wonder whether there was any disease would spread in it, but seems not to be the case. So, there we are. I reckon my best guess is that 2 of these pots equals 1 of the ones that I had in the polytunnel with fresh compost. And I think that's reasonably successful, given that I didn't pay for this year. And what I think I'll do now is up the amount of feed that I put into the compost when I make it, and hopefully that will continue to grow potatoes and increase slightly. We'll see. This is a long trial and it's worth the investment if you get a reasonable return. So this twice used compost is off to the compost store, ready for its 3rd use. I thought I'd just show you what Mrs. K's been doing whilst I've been busy. And over here we've got the last of the fruit, some black currants and some jostaberries. And I understand they're going into a pie, which is my favourite. So the tops of the potatoes are going in with the foliage compost, And then this is the reusable compost, so I'm just going to move that into there, mix it up with what's in there already, and I'll be taking that out at some point and just turning it and giving it a good feed, and maybe I'll mix it in good time with what I've got in the rotary composter. I think the key is to keep rejuvenating this compost with feed, other mixtures of compost and organic matter, and just making sure that you keep it reasonably friable and made of good compost that you've gathered. So in it goes. So it's time to take out the last of the broad beans. There's a few reasonable sized pods on here, so I'm hoping for a few beans, but it doesn't look like there's quite so many as the last two sowings. But it's time to get it out. I'm going to use this land for sowing purple sprouting broccoli, and that's nearly ready. So time for it to come out. The foliage will be going into the foliage compost bin, and the beans will be going home. It's always a good idea to take the canes out first, because bending down into foliage like this, it'd be so easy to hit your eye. Okay, we're good to go. Well, there's a meal or two in there, so that's not too bad. And we'll clear this ground now, get the foliage away, and that's a wrap for today.